In the long run, there can be no joy for anybody until there is joy finally for us all. When large numbers of people share their joy in common, the happiness of each is greater because each adds fuel to the other's flame. Joy is prayer. Joy is strength. Joy is love. Joy is a net of love that draws people in. Joy is the simplest form of gratitude. The best way to show our gratitude to God and the people is to accept everything with joy. A joyful heart is the inevitable result of a heart burning with love. Never let anything so fill you with sorrow as to make you forget the joy of the Christ risen.
Well, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the sun on my skin. It was 2011 and we were for work in Israel. I had a grant to make short videos on location, and we had managed to gather funds to also bring my husband and our 2 children, an 8-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, along as well. So we spent our summer days driving in a tiny car through Israel, visiting about 3 historical sites a day and recording endless hours of video material. We would wake up in the morning and my son would say, "Mommy, what old rocks will we see today?" And as you could see in the picture, we also brought along a puppet. And for some reason, I spent countless hours underneath tables and rocks. Now, one afternoon, we were filming at the Sea of Galilee, at Tabqa. It's a place at the lake where Jesus had called his first disciples to follow him. And we had stepped somewhat into the water to sit on a rock and record a video while the kids played in the water just outside the view of the camera. Now, imagine trying to record video with commentary, while in the distance you see your son throwing rocks in the water and my daughter's chasing minnows with a little fishing net. And then it dawned on me. We were splashing and playing at the exact place where Jesus had walked up and called young people to come and follow him. You see, back then, this was the best place of the whole lake to catch fish. And as the kids were laughing and having a good time, I just soaked up the moment. Wow, we were there, and I could just see in my mind's eye Jesus laughing and splashing with us. Little fish between our toes. So we did not get much filming done. It was perfect for that moment, that afternoon. All was well. Jesus felt near. And I just wanted to hold on to that moment in Tabqa. So it's my official happy place. So what's your happy place? Can you use a place like that right now? Away from all the craziness around us? A place or moment of joy and peace? Well, these past couple of weeks, we've studied the letter to the Philippians. Paul wrote this letter while he was in prison for sharing the Jesus story. And today we arrive at the final chapter, chapter 4, in which Paul thanks the believers for their support. And he starts out this section by writing this, if you would read along. I urge Euodia and Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you also, my loyal companion, help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. So here we find one of the main reasons for the writing of this letter. Two leaders in the church are having some kind of conflict, and Paul wants them to reconcile. Two women, Euodia and Syntyche. They probably were leaders of the house churches. So what is Paul practically saying as he closes out this letter? That whenever we have a falling out or a disagreement with someone, we just need to rejoice, be gentle, make sure people see that we're nice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Is Paul giving us a to-do list to show that we're nice Christians and that we are experiencing Jesus in our life? Well, if that's the case, I'm afraid I'm in trouble. You see, when my husband sometimes calls somebody on the phone, like some company, and he wants to exchange something, and he doesn't seem to get people to comply with him, I hear him say, well, I guess I will have to have my wife call you next. So in that case, I'm kind of glad that we have these passages in Scripture where Jesus tells the Pharisees where to take their business. But seriously, is that the takeaway that we're getting from the end of the letter to the Philippians? And I don't think so. You see, people write letters for a reason. From the beginning of this letter to the end, there is something on Paul's heart. He deeply cared for what happened inside the community, and if something is wrong there, it affects everyone in that community. So when Paul writes, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord, he actually does not appear to bring this matter up for the first time. The language in which this letter is written, the language of Greek, it actually says, I continually urge Euodia, and I continually urge Syntyche. So this somehow is an existing, ongoing situation familiar to Paul and the people, the believers in Philippi, and it must be remedied. Now, we also know that Paul trusted in a good outcome. He held on to the larger picture. That's why, at the beginning of the letter to the Philippians, he writes, I am confident of this, that the one who began a good work among you all, that's what the Greek says, will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ. All of you, including Euodia and Syntyche. So by the time that we make it to the end of this letter, we can catch a glimpse of what the conflict might be about. The city of Philippi had been founded as a Roman colony. It was named even after the daughter of the first emperor of Rome, Colonia Julia Augusta Philippensis. Now you thought it was hard to come up with baby names. Its citizens enjoyed the privileges of Roman citizenship, but you know how that goes. With privileges come responsibilities. The people owed the emperor their loyalty and favors. Philippi was an extension of Rome itself, a model city, if you will, and the people were fiercely loyal to Rome. Now in chapter 3 of this letter, just before our chapter, Paul reminded the people in Philippi that they're citizens of heaven. They represent God's realm on earth, not the emperor's ideal city. And I believe this might be a clue as to what's going on in these house churches in Philippi and between leaders including Euodia and Syntyche. Some people simply were more pro-Roman than others. And being pro-Roman meant participating in pagan worship practices to show one's loyalty to Rome. So perhaps those women had different views on how to handle this as Jesus followers. So I'm sure everyone's social media was just blowing up about this. Both women must have had their own faithful social media followers, but in the process, it was hurting the community. It's so stressful. Whenever there's conflict in family, among friends, loved ones, in churches, it just causes unrest, painful feelings, hurt feelings. And I don't know about you, but I just don't function well in those environments. We're just not made for that, right? We were created to live in peace. Jesus said, "My peace I leave with you." So Paul wants to see the conflict resolved. But when I read today's passage in today's text, I find something just puzzling. Paul addresses conflicts in the church in Philippi, but not by pointing fingers. Not by pointing fingers at people, not by demoting or demeaning people. Instead, he writes that these two friends struggled beside him in the work of the gospel. He tells them to rejoice, be gentle, and to remember the Lord is near. Now, so why did Paul decide to take a trip down memory lane when conflict threatened the very fabric of that Jesus community? So I recall working in a summer camp in Maryland some 32 years ago. I flew over from the Netherlands to spend the summers running in the woods, playing with children, and being submerged in American culture. I made lifelong friends. I also remember getting into a major conflict with some people one night in the dining hall. We all sat around the table eating spaghetti. Now, I cut my spaghetti in small pieces and then eat it with a spoon. My friend was absolutely horrified. "No," she said, "you cannot cut spaghetti. You must leave the noodle long, then twirl it in your spoon with your fork, and that's how you eat spaghetti." Everybody was a spaghetti expert around the table. And I said, "Well, who cares? It all tastes the same. That doesn't matter." We all got mad and left the table. So we still refer to that event as our spaghetti fight. To this day, we're still close friends. We're married, we have kids. She even boasts that she's a grandma. And through the years, we have stood by one another as we went through difficult times. And so what started as a spaghetti fight ended with an unconditional friendship. You know, Henry Nouwen, the Dutch theologian, put his finger on it when he said, "When everything is dark, when we are surrounded by despairing voices, when we do not see any exits, then we can find salvation in a remembered love, a love which is not simply a collection of a bygone past, but a living force which sustains us in the present." Paul remembered the struggles he encountered when he first came to Philippi with his travel buddies. How they met with a group of women outside the city by the river on a Jewish Sabbath. It was not without its challenges, and before long the pro-Roman people in the city felt threatened. Paul had introduced different religious ideas that challenged people's loyalties and even their sense of economics. Now, anytime people touch your wallet, you know how that goes, right? And so the people rounded him up, threw him and his worker Silas in prison and beaten them. So as Paul writes this current letter, it's not his first time in prison. Euodia and Syntyche, the two women in our passage, they knew that story. They knew that story quite well about Paul and Silas in prison on that first visit. It had rocked the Christian community in Philippi. Luke writes about it in the book of Acts. He writes about Paul and Silas praying and singing in the middle of the night in that prison cell. Can you imagine being beaten, thrown in a filthy prison, and singing? Do you ever find yourself talking to God or singing or listening to music when life is a struggle or just plain confusing? I know I do. But as Paul writes this particular letter, he's not writing from that same prison experience. So why does he go down memory lane in the face of serious conflicts? Well, perhaps he wanted to model empathy for the other leaders. I think that's possible. He empathized with the plight of many of the believers in that section. It was not always easy in those days, but I think he was aiming for more. I think he went down memory lane and mentioned his friends' struggles for a different reason. Euodia and Syntyche, sure, they remembered the stories told by the other prisoners about Paul and Silas singing and praying. They remembered their stories about them wondering to whom these men were turning for comfort, about God being near to Paul and Silas. They remember them telling them about an earthquake that opened the doors of the prison and all of the prisoners walking out of that prison into the starry night. Talking about God showing up. Wow. Praying and singing turning in utmost fireworks. And as in the years following, the women worked on teams with Paul and Timothy, they encountered struggles, but they remembered God had shown up before. It will be okay. So Paul reminded everyone in his letter that he focused on the greater picture. The Lord was always near. Now we don't have to go far back in memory to recall times of struggles. Difficulty and transition seem to be the name of the game nowadays. Suddenly we're supposed to adapt to living in a pandemic. Some here have suffered loss upon loss, political changes, changes in our relationships, our friendships. And at times you may feel like it's change upon change or struggle upon struggle, and suddenly you find yourself riddled with anxiety and worry about what's next. Maybe you pray. Maybe you sing. Or maybe you stick your earbuds in your ear, turn on Netflix or Spotify, and you just clock out. How do we experience the Lord near in all this? Rejoice, Paul wrote. In this particular case of conflict in Philippi, he said, be gentle about it. Some translations say, be reasonable. Let your reasonableness be known. Well, those church leaders differed, right, about how to go about living in Roman culture. Well, that's beyond the spaghetti fight. People pick sides in communities. It's tiring and it's everywhere. We see it on social media everywhere. Paul encouraged the Philippian believers to be reasonable. So when the world around us blows up, we must come together instead. Remember, Paul says, God brought you and I through struggles before. Y'all rejoice, have joy now. And in case you're not getting it, he seems to say, let me say it again, rejoice. Throw a party. No, not the Roman way, do it the Jesus way. Those parties are too wild. But throw a party, dare to live, don't put your life on pause. Because the Lord is near. He reminded them of the words of the Psalms that they knew. The Lord is near to all who call upon him. It will be okay. So what if we followed Paul's advice to the Philippians? Not just believing it, but truly practicing it. What if we lived from minute to minute and from day to day in the realization that the Lord is always near us? Well, I think actually for some of us that ship has sailed. We have a knack in American Christianity to focus on guilt. We talk about the Lord Jesus being near, but we often use it to enforce behavior patterns. We tell little children that Jesus sees them when they do wrong. Watch out now, Jesus sees you. We shame young adolescents and ask them how they would feel if Jesus got a hold of their phone and saw their apps or what they're texting. Or we ask people, If Jesus walked with you through your life for a day, what would he see and what would he feel? Well, I guess by the way you're asking me that, I must be the disappointment of the universe. I just don't measure up. Thanks a lot. Maybe I don't like Jesus that near. But that's a shame, right? We were made to live in his presence and be excited about it. Or what about the way that we present Jesus' words in the Gospels? Does that invite us to want to focus on the Lord being near in our daily life? Is that the picture that Paul offered to the Philippians of the Lord being near? So picture with me a story that we have in the Gospel of Matthew, okay? The followers of Jesus are on that same lake that we were with the little kids, making videos, and they're in a boat. Jesus sent his disciples across the lake while he stays ashore on a mountain to pray. So they get a good ways across, and it starts to storm. At this point, Jesus shows up in the middle of the lake, and he's walking on water. The students freak out, yelling, "It's a ghost," or some other sea god, as the local legends would have it. And Jesus speaks to them and assures them it's him. As soon as Peter, one of the younger and more outspoken Jesus followers, realizes it's Jesus, he gets out of the boat, starts walking on the water, and goes towards Jesus. And it's a total selfie moment. And then he realizes what he has just done. He sees the giant waves, feels the wind, flips out, and starts to sink. But he knows that Jesus is right there, so he cries out, "Lord, save me." In that moment, he does not get his theology straight. He does not realize that Jesus is bigger than the water and the storm, but Jesus is right there. And he catches him and he says, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" And they get in the boat. I think that is a beautiful picture of comfort and trust. Not at all a picture of someone not measuring up. But then again, I have raised a teenage boy. I've raised a teenage boy to the age of Peter. Or maybe I should say I have survived raising a boy to young adulthood. Anyone else? One time I looked out the window of my house to the back where my son and his high school buddies were because I heard a commotion. Sure enough, they had set the grass on fire. Now, we have a fire pit, but it's so much more fun to make fire in the grass with the dry leaves, right? No worries. They were trying to put it out by hitting the grass with golf clubs. So I ran back inside to get a very tiny fire extinguisher. Well, that was not going to do much. So next I ran back out to get the water hose. Oh well, it's all part of raising a boy. Guys, do that in the fire pit next time, right? Honey, when you get home, the backyard looks a little bit toasty. But it's a key moment, right? It could have been a moment of chaos and ranting and raving. I cannot believe y'all do that. But in a moment of crisis, we just want our kids to know we're there. It was okay. And we're present. We actually figured that by now the kids would have totaled several cars. Well, they've hit a few deer, bent some bumpers in parking lots, hit the front of their cars, some more deer. One of them got stopped for speeding and then managed to get a warning for stopping at the wrong side of the road for getting that ticket. But it's all about how we respond, right? That reasonableness Paul talked about, that gentleness, glad you're okay, we can fix the car. So why then do we often assume that Jesus said to Peter, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Why not, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" "Oh, Peter, I knew it would be you. You little faith, why did you doubt? I've got you, come on in the boat." As parents, we have certain pictures in our mind of what it means to have the Lord near. We guide, we protect, we're mentors, we're present. That's what good parents and mentors and guides do. And we all know unfit examples. It's just unfortunate when we superimpose that on Jesus. You see, we were made to live in his presence, and it must be comfortable. In the Gospel of Luke, 2 other disciples, James and John, equally young at the time, right, tried to be protective over Jesus. It's funny in itself, right? A group of people did not welcome Jesus somewhere. So the 2 guys said, "Hey, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" And Luke writes that Jesus turns around and rebuked them. Now, what picture comes to mind when you read that? Like Jesus really put them straight. Or a picture in which Jesus says, "Really, guys? Come on, let's go have a burger." Whatever picture we have of Jesus, whatever picture of our upbringing or our intonation we have always heard and superimpose on the person of Jesus determines how we truly feel about trusting him, how we feel about being near him, shaped by our experiences and our memories. And that is what Paul wanted for the people in Philippi. Practicing living in the presence of Jesus means that we're aware of our surroundings and look for places where God shows up. Look for it in the beauty of art and music and nature. When Jesus first called his followers by the Sea of Galilee, he met them amidst their daily lives as they were living off the fishery. He invited them to follow him at the same place where we stood with the kids in 2011, with the little fish playing between their toes. Jesus met the people where they were. He invited them to learn from him, had parents bring their kids to him. He attended their parties, their weddings. He was near them until the people who considered that a threat killed him. But God had a bigger picture in mind. We were made to be close to God and to one another. So after Jesus rose from the dead, his followers went back to Galilee, where it had all started. Sometimes when life goes through too many transitions, you've got to go back down memory lane. Remember where the Lord showed up before. Where did you last sense the presence of Jesus? Jesus showed up in Galilee. As his followers went fishing on the lake again, Jesus reminded them of their times together at that lake by saying, "Hey, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will catch some fish." And they immediately realized, they recognized Jesus was present, and they cried out, "It's the Lord!" And Peter jumped in the water again and made his way toward Jesus. Jesus is present. The Lord is near, Paul wrote to the Philippians. You can resolve your conflicts, Euodia and Syntyche, because you remember when God showed up before. Sometimes he's in an earthquake that throws open the door of your prisons and your circumstances. And other times, he's in the text of a long-lost friend. Sometimes Jesus walks to you on water and he catches you when you feel you are drowning in people's expectations of you. And he tells you it's going to be okay. He's present in the hugs and the fist pumps of people when you encounter loss and grief. And other times, he shows up at your party when you accomplish that next step in life. A few years ago, we lived on the other side of Belton, and life was busy. I felt worn down. Family life was good, but work was hard. And we were ministering at a church where I ended up doing children's ministry because, well, that's kind of what you always end up doing when your husband is the pastor. And on top of everything else, that led to conflict in the church. Everyone had different ideas of what children's ministry is supposed to look like. One group of parents wanted it one way, another group of parents wanted it yet another way, leaders wanted to see something else. It was miserable. I felt I just could not measure up, and everyone ate a piece of my liver. Where was Jesus in all this? I typically could find the presence of Jesus in nature or music, but I lost any sense of peace. Even my spaghetti friend lived overseas. Other friends were far away. The dog had died. And apart from family, it appeared like a world of conflict. And then one late afternoon on a Saturday, a car drove up. And out of that car stepped my brother. "Hallo, zusje," he said. That's Dutch for "hello, little sister." He lives in Canada, and I am the oldest one. But that's what he always says when we meet up. He stepped out of the car with his family, and it was a total surprise. "Hello, sis." "Hi, little brother." And all was well. Jesus reminded me of his presence. The Lord is always near. He always shows up. He knows what we need. Jesus knew his followers needed his presence, so he and his followers ended up fishing at that lake again. Paul knew. He reminded the Christians at Philippi they could resolve conflict, for the Lord always is near. My friend and I knew a spaghetti fight became a lifelong friendship, for Jesus is present. We now laugh about raising our kids. We were made to live in the very presence of Jesus. So when you feel like drowning, look back. See where God has worked in your life before. Look around you for his presence. And before you know it, Jesus shows up in a kind face and says, "Hallo, zusje. Hello, sis."